Hello and welcome to Americorps Vista and the first webinar of your orientation, Countdown to Vista Service. This brief period before you start service next week is a great opportunity to learn about how Vista works, more about your benefits, and a whole lot more. My name is Eric Powell, and I'm joined by Andy King. We will be your hosts today from Americorps Vista. You will also see many of our colleagues, Jennifer Brooks, Jacob Doney, Charles Wong, and Chris Hawks, as well as our partners at LSI, Kim Adams and Jeff Banis, in the chat and the Q&A. And I do want to quickly say, Andy and I really loved seeing your comments in the chat before we began. It truly is great and such an exciting time as you are gearing up to start your Vista year, and we're very, very happy to be with you today.
And hello, everyone. This is Andy King, and I want to add my welcome as well, and thank you for joining Americorps Vista. I'm really happy to get introduced to you today. And like Eric, I hope this year will be a powerful experience for you, and I look forward to helping you to get started. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. We've asked you to log on today to give us a chance to connect with you and to help ease you into your service year. We also know that this webinar is a great way for you to meet other new Americorps members and to start building some connections with your new colleagues across the country. We'll take some time to reinforce some of the important details of your Americorps service. We know there's a lot of information coming at you from our office and possibly from your project site. So we want to highlight several critical pieces of information on this session. And finally, we want you to leave the webinar with a really good sense of where you can find answers to other questions that might come up, other questions you might have. With our limited time together today, we might not be able to answer all your questions, though we're going to work hard to do that in the Q&A. So Eric, you want to get us started here?
Absolutely. It is my distinct pleasure to give you this official welcome to Americorps and Volunteers in Service to America. On today's session, we have about 375, 380 members that are all beginning service with you this month. And currently, just over 5,000 Vista members are serving in rural and urban areas, in all 50 states, and in several US territories and tribal nations. As a new member of Vista, you are joining a national service program with a rich history. Vista has been fighting poverty and building communities for more than 50 years. Our strength comes from the talent, motivation, and energy of our members, just like you. So let me thank you for stepping up to share your skills and your passion to serve our communities. It really is an honor for me to welcome you on behalf of the Vista program. So to start, on the screen, you'll see an image that shows the Vista program structure with key partners that make your service possible. You can see that there are several layers that help support Vista projects and Vista members like you. The first is Americorps headquarters located in Washington, D.C. Americorps also has regional offices across the country. And in those offices, Americorps staff review and approve proposals for new Vista projects and approve the placement of members into those projects. The regional office is a resource for Vista members who have concerns about their assignment that the supervisor cannot resolve. You can reach them by email using the state abbreviation at cns.gov. For example, if you're serving in Texas, you could just send them an email with tx@cns.gov. Also in this image, you can see the sponsoring organization is listed along with your supervisor. Your sponsor and supervisor will be your day-to-day support and provide all the details on your project work. At our Americorps headquarters, where Andy and I are based, you will be supported by the Vista Training Unit and the Vista Member Support Unit, or VMSU, among other departments. If you cannot find the answer to a benefits-related question on Americorps.gov or from the Vista Member Handbook, the VMSU is a helpful resource for questions regarding your benefits throughout your year of service. One of the great things about what you're doing is this year, you're going to be joining thousands of Vista colleagues across the country to fight poverty. The Vista program mission is to strengthen organizations that fight poverty, and we do that by deploying Americorps members to serve in local community agencies. The Vista headquarters team includes multiple teams and 30 staff. Staff teams include the member support and training units, along with program impact and marketing and outreach. Many of our staff include service alumni of Americorps and CCC, Vista, the Peace Corps, and more. And I happily served as a Vista member. Many of our staff served in Peace Corps, so it's great to be among other people who appreciate national and international service. And again, during your service year, the VMSU will be your point of contact for any benefits-related questions that you cannot find on AmeriCorps.gov.
All right, so let's focus for a few minutes on you and your role in the Vista program. The role of the Vista member is to support the organization's mission by providing solutions that enhance efficiency and build capacity by things like raising money, developing systems, recruiting volunteers, and other tasks that create lasting change. Vista members are recruited by their sponsoring organizations, or in some cases, they find service opportunities on their own and apply to them directly to Vista projects through My Americorps. And speaking of recruitment, we have a quick chat question for you. How were you recruited to serve in Vista? Did your sponsoring organization recruit you directly, or did you find your position on your own? So if you would please take a moment and type your answer in the chat. And it looks like the answers are now coming in too fast for me to even read them. Maybe you'll have better luck, but it looks like a real mix here of people finding it on their own, sometimes stumbling upon the position, hearing about it from a friend or a colleague, or maybe an advisor or a professor. And then others saying, yeah, I was recruited. They reached out to me, and the organization tried to get in touch with me. All right, so if you haven't had a chance to drop in your thought there about how you were recruited, go ahead and do that. And I appreciate all of you sharing in this little activity. So as you've heard in the last few minutes, we are a large and diverse group of folks on this webinar. Yet, no matter what your status is or how you came to apply and accept your Vista position, all Vista members have a few things in common. First, you and your Vista colleagues are making a 1-year, that is 365-day, full-time commitment to strengthen and support your community through your service. And next, central to all Vista member service is an important document called your Vista Assignment Description, or what we like to abbreviate as VAD, V-A-D, VAD. The VAD provides the overarching goals of your project. It explains the objectives that you're working towards during your year, and it lays out the specific activities that you will complete to accomplish those objectives. All Americorps Vista members have a Vista assignment description, and if you don't have yours already, you can find your VAD on the member homepage in My Americorps. That is at my.americorps.gov. And it's important to know that your VAD was probably written before you were recruited or selected for the project, so some updates might be in order before you dive into your service. So you'll want to check in with your supervisor next week, once you get started, and talk about whether any changes would be necessary for your VAD. And when we meet again on next Monday's webinar, we'll go into more detail about capacity building and the unique nature of Vista service. So please make sure you have your Vista assignment description by then. That is Monday, your first day of service. All right, so now let's get a little bit more information about where you're going to be serving. So in the chat, please take a moment to type in your answer to this question. In what city or town will you serve? So again, we have a lot of people on the webinar. The chat is moving fast and furious, but I see towns and cities and states listed here, everywhere from the eastern seaboard. We've got Virginia and Maryland and DC, all the way to the southeast and Arizona and New Mexico. We've got the mountain states, Colorado, Wyoming, everywhere. Just see Florida and Illinois, center, the heart of the country. So you are everywhere. Vistas are everywhere, which is great because, of course, we know the need in the country is great, and we have opportunities all across the country. Based on your Americorps applications and the service placements for this particular cohort of Vistas, will be starting on Monday. We have members starting out this month in many different communities and in lots of different types of Vista projects.
That was awesome to see. Well, now we're going to switch to use a different feature in Zoom. We're going to use a poll. So in a second, you'll see a poll appear on your screen. And the question is, are you relocating in order to serve in Americorps? Or I guess it could be, are you relocating soon? But we really want to get a quick sense of whether or not you are planning to move, to relocate for your service. I see quite a few people are responding right now. It looks like almost everyone has responded, but we'll give you a few more seconds just to see what it looks like the majority of people are doing. And we'll give you one more second and we'll close the poll. So, okay, almost half, 54% of people said yes, they are relocating or planning to relocate very soon. 46% said no. So that's not too far from the national average, but for those of you who are relocating, we certainly wish you safe, smooth, and fun adventures. And I will add a personal plug. I hope if you're relocating by car, that you happen to pass by one of the world's largest roadside attractions, like the largest ball of twine. I just always thought that would be cool. Never seen it, but maybe one day. So today's webinar is just one part of a multifaceted orientation that all new Vista members complete. On the far left of this graphic, you can see the phases of your orientation and some of the major tasks in the blocks to the right of each phase. This structure is also reflected in the Vista member orientation learning path that you took on the Vista campus. Although you may start off by teleserving or serving from home, your supervisor will still be providing you with what's called an on-site orientation and training to guide you as you start your year of service. The phases of your orientation include pre-service, which is where you are now because you haven't yet started, then the phase of your first day of service, and finally in service. And it's really good to know that orientation to your Americorps service is an ongoing process. It involves a number of people. We know your position will be a complex one, and it does take a bit of time and effort to get you started strong. So Andy and I are going to talk through some of the really important elements of the first two phases of your orientation. As part of your Vista member orientation, you probably already know that you are required to complete several courses and tutorials online. And you probably also know that you found these courses on the Vista member orientation learning path on the Vista campus. And these courses must be completed before you begin service. If you have not done so already, please make sure to access the learning path on the Vista campus. You can do this by going to learn.americorps.gov. You'll have to create an account if it's your first time visiting the site, and this account is separate from your My Americorps account. But once you're signed into the Vista campus, click on the catalog link in the menu near the top, then locate the Vista member orientation learning path and subscribe and join the training to start. The terms and conditions course is linked to your my.americorps.gov account, so you can certify your acceptance there. And keep in mind, if you haven't done so already, you must accept the terms and conditions of service in order to start your Vista service. Andy and I know that there's a lot to do before Monday, stuff that we've given you, your project might give you, you might even be relocating. But again, with all the stuff that we're asking you to do, you can keep track of your progress on the coursework and the required forms by following the Vemo learning path on the Vista campus and looking for the green check mark next to each item.
Okay, so in addition to the coursework on the Vista campus that Eric just described, you'll need to complete a set of onboarding forms. So these forms allow us to actually put you into service, and they include a direct deposit form so we can pay out your living allowance, a federal tax withholding form called a W-4, an unpaid compensation information form, and then there's a place where you select your end of service benefit. All of these forms are located in your account in my.americorps.gov. If you haven't completed them already, please plan on doing it right away. Again, we need these forms so that we can officially enroll you in Americorps, process your living allowance payments, and other benefits. There are a number of benefits that are available to Vista members, and if you haven't already, please go through the information about the benefits that's available on Americorps.gov. All right, so I imagine you have a lot of questions about what your first day of service is going to look like. So we'll share what we know to help you get ready. So as mentioned earlier, your first day of service is this coming Monday. That's August 16th, 2021. And that day will begin your orientation to your project site and your specific duties as a Vista. Your supervisor may have prepared a formal agenda for you and maybe scheduled meetings or other activities. Day one schedules vary from project to project, so you'll need to check in with your supervisor this week so you'll get a sense of what to expect and then what materials you'll need for your first day. Along with starting your on-site orientation on Monday, Eric and I will present your second orientation webinar that's called Launching Your Vista Service. We'll be back online with you for that webinar from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, just the same time as today's webinar, so whatever time zone you're in, you can extrapolate. And as with this webinar, you'll get an email with participation details in the next day or two. The link to join can also be found in the guide to entering Vista Service that Eric emailed to you last week. And it's also the exact same link that you used to join today. So we try to keep it simple. If you got here today, you should be able to get here on Monday. So on Monday's webinar, we'll go a little bit deeper into some information about the Vista program. And as mentioned, we'll talk about your Vista assignment description, and then we'll share with you some additional available resources. We'll also have time again for question and answer to make sure that you're in good shape for the rest of your first week of service. And then really the big news, the big closing sort of for Monday's webinar is that Eric will administer the oath of service, which officially swears you in as a Vista member.
Well, next we're going to segue into looking a little bit deeper at a bunch of common questions that Vistas have, and we're going to answer as many as we can today. As Andy said earlier, we both are sure that there's probably quite a few questions on your mind as you prepare for service and relocate and starting this amazing new Vista adventure. Typically, new Vista member questions fall into one of three categories: questions for your project, sponsoring organization, or supervisor, questions for other contacts, and then questions specifically for Vista. Today, we're going to review some of the most important and time-sensitive questions that new Vista members ask. In some cases, you may have questions about the office setting at your project, maybe your work schedule or other tasks specific to your Vista project. On the screen, you can see a reminder of two questions that are listed in the Vista member orientation FAQs that I sent out earlier today. In addition, you may want details on things like the office dress code, what you should bring on your first day on site, etc. For those types of questions, definitely document them and write them down and reach out early and often to your project supervisor, which is the same as your direct supervisor. This person will be able to orient you to your specific project site, the community you will serve, and the people you will work with this year. And I'm sure, based on lots of thoughts, that you probably also have specific questions about the benefits of Vista service. This screen shows that you can see the most frequently asked questions that we receive at Vista headquarters. One of the questions is, does the Vista Healthcare cover my current medication? And does my student loan qualify for deferment or forbearance? Because these types of questions are very personal to you and our Vista staff doesn't have those details, you will need to reach out to other contacts to find those answers. But I will say, specifically for the healthcare question, make sure that you take the time to check out the details of the website for the Vista Healthcare Benefit Administrator. They are called IMG, the International Medical Group, and you can find a wealth of information, including member healthcare guides at americorpsvista.imglobal.com. And we just posted the links to that in the chat so you can access that at any time. Also, to find out about your student loans, review the details in the Vista Member Handbook and then reach out to your specific lender for details. And I'm guessing you probably have a lot of questions for our Vista team. As it was noted in the FAQs, our staff often are asked about the required background check, about healthcare coverage, relocation benefits, living allowance, and even things like working outside of the Vista position. So let's walk through each of these quickly.
All right, so our first question that we'll take a look at is, how do I complete the criminal history check? This is one of the really big to-do items on your orientation checklist. So as you may have read, you're required to undergo a background investigation before starting service. And that includes securely submitting your information online so that we can complete a background check, and that happens at no cost to you. You will receive, if you haven't already, an email from support@checker.com. And that email has instructions on how you can securely submit the information required for that background check. Once you get that email, you have 7 days to complete it. It's really easy to do. It only takes a minute or two. So once you get that email, don't delay, just go in. You've got 7 days to complete it. And to make sure that we can communicate with you not only about the background check, but about any other onboarding stuff, we're going to use your email address the way it appears in My Americorps. So we ask that you make sure that that reflects your correct email address. As mentioned, you're required to submit that background check information within 7 calendar days of getting the email. If you don't do it, it could result in a delay of you starting your service, right? Because we've got to have that done. We're required to get that done, and we don't want you to be delayed. If you come across any questions during the process, we have some folks who can help. Their email address is vistafingerprint@cns.gov. That email address is included in the guide to entering service that you got by email last week. And when your background investigation is completed, our criminal history check team will compare the results of the background check to the disclosures that you made in your Americorps application, and if you made any additional disclosures in a separate form. As long as everything aligns, you won't hear from us, and you'll be placed in service, and you'll just go on and everything will be good. Okay, so let's shift gears and talk a little bit about Vista's healthcare benefits. We know it's new and sometimes confusing, so we want to give you some details here to hopefully clear it up. So in about 2 weeks, so after you're in service, you're going to receive an email from that company that Eric mentioned called IMG. They are the administrator for the Vista Healthcare Benefits. And that email message is going to ask you to select a benefit, and then it'll give you instructions on how to sign up for that, how to enroll in the benefit. So it'll be about your second week of service when you'll be able to enroll in one of the benefits, but your healthcare coverage is going to be effective starting your official start date of Vista service. So we'll backdate it. So if something needs to be covered from that first week or two, you can, it'll be covered. And if you need to get proof of coverage during your first week, we ask that you contact IMG directly so that they can provide you with a temporary coverage card that you can show to your provider. As a reminder, you've probably read the Vista program offers two different health benefit options. One is the healthcare allowance, and that's if you have health coverage now, like you've got private insurance or you're covered under Medicaid. And then the other is the Vista Health Benefit Plan, and that's intended for members who don't currently have any health coverage. To receive one of these benefits, you have to enroll. There's no automatic enrollment, right? So if you don't do anything, you're not going to get it. Again, you won't have to do anything for this for about 2 weeks when you get an email from IMG. And once you get that email, you'll have 60 days from the start of your Vista service to enroll in one of those two benefits. If you sign up for one and then later you find that your situation changes, then you can change your health benefit with us accordingly, and you do that by contacting IMG. So for example, if you're currently covered by your parents' plan and then you turn 26 years old and lose that coverage, then you should contact IMG, ideally about 30 days before that change is going to happen, and then they will set you up to switch you from the healthcare allowance to the health benefit plan. These health benefits is really an important benefit for you, and it's time sensitive, right? And of course, the type of benefit that you're eligible to receive depends on your current healthcare coverage situation.
Dun, 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 dun. That's the sound of another question coming in. Am I eligible for Vista's relocation benefits? Well, each year, a number of new Vista members relocate to serve in a different community. And on our webinar today, about 54% of you indicated that you are relocating during our poll question. So here's an easy way to know if you are eligible for the Vista relocation benefit. If you have relocated more than 50 miles from your home of record to your service site, or if you will be relocating within 45 days, you may qualify for a relocation travel allowance and a one-time settling in allowance. If you are eligible for financial travel support, you should have already received an email from the Vista Member Support Unit, or VMSU, and that email includes a relocation form for you to complete and return. If you already relocated, or if you plan to relocate more than 50 miles to your service site and you have not yet received an email confirmation, or if you have any specific questions about the relocation form, please send an email to vmsu@cns.gov. Another common question that comes in from many people, since it's applicable to everyone, is how will I receive my living allowance? I can tell you it's not going to be via carrier pigeon. Although I think that would be cool, it would probably get lost. So let's talk about your living allowance. The quick question that we want to ask you first is, do you know when you're getting your first living allowance? If you think you have an idea of your first pay date, please go ahead and type the answer in the chat. Again, the question is, when do you think your first living allowance pay date will be? We'll see what people indicate. I see some say August 27th, 2 weeks after starting service. A lot of people saying September 3rd, September 14th. More 2 weeks after service, 27th. I guess that could be of any month, but I'm assuming that they're thinking September. End of August, on your first check. A lot of different responses coming in. Some people just blatantly saying, I have no idea, just tell me. Well, we'll go ahead and do that. So your first living allowance is scheduled to be on September 3rd, 2021. Most Vista members are paid directly by Americorps every 2 weeks on Fridays. However, some members are paid by their sponsoring organization, and their pay calendar may be slightly different. Your supervisor can tell you if you will be paid by them and share their pay schedule. Keep in mind, federal taxes are withheld from your living allowance, but state taxes are not. You must determine your own level of responsibility for state taxes. So, we suggest you check in with your state tax office for more details. If you are paid by Americorps headquarters, which is the majority of people, you can access your living allowance statement in my.americorps.gov. If you are paid directly by your Vista sponsor, you will receive pay statements from them. Related to that question is, how much is my living allowance? The amount that you receive in your living allowance biweekly payments will depend on where your service site is located. And again, we're specifically talking about your service site location. Pay rates vary by county, and if you haven't done so already, you can access the pay rate chart on americorps.gov to verify the amount that you will receive. And we'll be posting the link to that in the chat in a minute. Please note that the pay rates that only show the gross pay. They do not show the amount of federal taxes that will be deducted from your living allowance. So the amount that you see is before taxes are deducted. And we want to make sure that you get paid, and I'm sure that you do as well. So to make sure that happens, it's critical to complete the direct deposit information correctly. If either your routing number or account number you entered for your direct deposit is incorrect, you will not receive your living allowance payment as scheduled. And worse, you'll have to wait at least 2 more weeks until the next pay period to be paid. So we just ask you to make sure that you locate the routing number and account number correctly on your checks if you have them, or go to your online banking site and look at an account statement. You also may want to call your bank just to clarify and verify that you have the correct information. Again, we can't stress this enough because it's happened many times. Please be sure to double check that the numbers are accurate in your my.americorps.gov so you can get paid on time and accurately.
Yeah, we definitely want you to get paid. Okay, so our next question is, can I work another job while serving in Vista? And the answer is noted in the Vista Terms and Conditions course on the campus, which you may have already completed. And if you have, you saw that Vista members may be able to work another job while they're serving in Vista, but there are a few conditions that have to be in place. First of all, that other job must not interfere with your Vista schedule or requirements, and you must discuss the demands of the other job with your Vista supervisor and confirm that from their point of view, it's not going to prevent you from successfully completing your Vista assignment responsibilities. The supervisor must indicate their approval on the outside employment form, and we're going to drop a link. There it is. Thank you. There's a link in the chat right now to that form. All right, so those are a few of the questions that new Vista members most frequently seem to ask. And at this point, prior to your service starting, it's understandable if you do have a lot of questions right now. Again, some of those questions might be for your project supervisor, some might be for other contacts like IMG, and some might be for us here on the Vista staff. So Eric and I hope that this quick review was helpful and that by now you have a good idea of where to find additional information if you need it. So let's go back and look at our agenda again. So far, we've reviewed Vista's mission and structure. We've taken a look at your orientation, and then we've covered some of the most pressing questions that Vistas often have. At this time, we'll invite you to share any follow-up questions or questions that came up during or that will come up during our next agenda item. And you can do that. You can submit your questions by using the Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of the screen. And before we sign off today, we're going to work through as many of your questions as we can. All right, so now we're going to take a brief look at some of the concepts that are covered in that Vista Terms and Conditions course that we've been mentioning.
And that Vista Terms and Conditions course is a very important course because, as you know, it's a required course on the Vista campus. And it goes into detail about the rules of participation in Americorps. That is, for example, what is allowable while you are serving as a Vista member. Since Vista members are bound by a variety of laws, regulations, and other rules, we want to make sure that you understand them from day one so you can feel comfortable in your new position. If you have already completed the Terms and Conditions course, our next activity should be an easy review for you. But if you haven't yet completed the course, don't forget you need to do it ASAP by tomorrow, officially before you begin service, but the deadline is ideally tomorrow. This next activity will help emphasize some of the most sensitive issues. So on the screen, you can see the categories of activities addressed in the Terms and Conditions course. As a review today, Andy and I will walk through a couple of real-life scenarios to see whether or not these are allowable according to Vista's terms and conditions. So I'll give you some very simple instructions. We're going to present several scenarios and ask you to indicate yes or no using the chat panel. And to make it easy and quick, just type Y or N for each scenario. So here's the first one. I can voice my political opinion using social media where my profile identifies me as an Americorps member. Per the Vista terms and conditions, do you think the answer is yes or no? As Andy mentioned earlier, I'm seeing the chat fly almost faster than a 747. Mostly no's coming in. I see a couple of yeses. I think I might have seen a maybe or an I'm not sure. Quite a few more responses are coming in. It's clear that people are very quick to respond, which is great, getting their response recorded and on our radar. But I see a few more no's, a couple of yeses. See a yes with a question mark. That's always a good answer. I think maybe it's this. A couple more question marks. Well, thank you for that participation. We'll go ahead and see what the answer is. In this specific scenario, the answer is yes. You can have your Americorps, you can have Americorps listed on your personal social media profile and voice your own personal political opinions as part of your online life. However, you cannot represent yourself as a spokesperson for Americorps, Vista, or your sponsor. Additionally, you can voice political opinions on your own time, but not while serving at your site or while teleserving, nor while using any of the equipment at your site, including their Wi-Fi network or your office computer. Also, you should not put the Americorps logo as your profile picture when voicing political or other sensitive opinions on social media. When in doubt, keep your Americorps service and political activity completely separate.
All right, so here's our next scenario. Yes or no, I can demonstrate in a political rally. So again, according to the terms and conditions of Vista service, are you allowed to do this? And the answer is coming in very quickly. Looks like a lot of yeses so far. Now I'm seeing some yeses with some conditions associated to them, like as long as, or, you know, yeah, so good. A few no's, a little bit of variety here in the responses here. And of course, we saw with that first one was a bit of a twist. Some of you didn't see that one coming. And of course, we've selected for this activity some of the scenarios that, you know, maybe aren't quite as obvious because we wanted to dive in a little bit deeper with you all. So, okay. So, looks like most of you have had a chance to weigh in, and we'll go ahead and reveal the answer, and most of you landed here. The answer is yes, you can demonstrate in a political rally, but there are a number of conditions, as some of you indicated, right? It's got to be on your own time, and as long as you are not identified as an Americorps member or perceived to be an Americorps member. So it's that last part there, that perceived to be an Americorps member, that can be an important consideration since some of you may be serving in a small town or a local area where even though you're not wearing your Americorps gear, people will know that you are an Americorps member, right? Just because of your visibility and your activity there. So when in doubt about a specific activity, it's best to check with your supervisor first to kind of get their take on it. And if you need more guidance or help or support in getting a decision around that, they can help you reach out to your Americorps regional office to get clarification before you take any action.
Scenario number 3. I can ask people to donate money to a partisan political candidate as long as it's on my own time and I'm not identified as an Americorps member. Again, we want to see if the answer is yes or no. I'm seeing a couple of different varieties of responses, 1 or 2 question marks. It's always interesting to see some people use capital, some use lowercase. I'm sure some people would use hieroglyphics if that was available on the keyboard, but Andy and I wouldn't know how to read that. A couple of more no's, couple of yeses, a few more question marks. I see some people are adding some context to say maybe it depends on the people you're recruiting, or maybe it's uncertain. It's always good to see the context and see what you're thinking and why you're thinking it. But of course, a simple Y and an N is perfectly fine. Well, let's go ahead and see the answer. The answer is no. You are not allowed to raise money on behalf of a partisan political candidate at any time during your Americorps year. It doesn't matter if it's off-duty or at home, or even while not identified as an Americorps member. There's this federal law called the Hatch Act, and it prohibits all fundraising for partisan political candidates. You can, however, if you wish, raise funds in support of an issue or cause on your own time and when you are not identified as an Americorps member. So thank you very much for going through these scenarios. We know that the terms and conditions of your Americorps service contain many rules, and these rules in particular raise a lot of questions for new members. We certainly want you to feel comfortable getting started. So again, please don't hesitate to reach out to your project supervisor or Americorps regional office if you have more questions about these activities. And don't forget, you will need to complete the full terms and conditions course and indicate you've completed it in my.americorps.gov. So if you haven't done that, please plan to do that by tomorrow. We've covered a lot of information so far. We have more to go, but right now we're going to address some of the questions that you may have for Vista. As we queue up the questions, we want to thank our team who's been answering the questions in the Q&A, Jacob, Jennifer, Chris, and Charles. But now I'm going to turn to my colleague Andy and see if there's some common questions. We want to answer questions that seem like they apply to most Vistas on the webinar, since we know that sometimes questions come in that are very specific to certain people. So Andy, what question do you see coming in that we can answer?
Yeah, Eric, so we've had a number of questions related to the living allowance. So maybe we can cover those first. Some questions about taxes. So if I'm technically a volunteer, why do I need to fill out a W-4 and how do I do that?
Great. That is an easy question. So remember that that's one of the onboarding forms. So you'd log into your my.americorps.gov account. And on the left side, you'd see a link that says My Living Allowance. And on that page, you'll see your direct deposit information. And beneath that, you'll see federal tax withholding /W4. So you just edit that, fill it out. If you do have any questions, because that form can be kind of tricky, the best thing to do is Google IRS W4 worksheet. Since that form is a federal form through the IRS, there's a lot more details about if you have questions about that specific form. And on that My Living Allowance page is where you'd also enter your designation of beneficiary.
Great, thanks for that, Eric. And then some related questions were, well, gee, why is this taxable at all? And the reason for that is your living allowance is considered income, even though it's not a wage. It is income, and so it's taxable, just like any other income that you would receive during a particular year. There's a couple of folks asked again about the state income tax withholding and what do I do? Like if I don't know about state taxes, what do I do? So our advice there is to go to the website for the taxation office or agency in the state where you'll be serving, right? So if you're going to be serving in Colorado, you just, do a search for Colorado Department of Taxation, get to their website, and then usually those sites have a tax table, and it'll say if you earn between $0 and X amount, this is how much in your single, this is how much you would owe, if you're in between Y amount and Z amount. So you just figure out how much you're going to earn over the course of, for this year, right between August and December, right? That will be your Vista earnings for this year. How much is that going to be? And then see if you even make enough to owe taxes in that state, and if so, how much. And then you can just put aside a little bit of money. So come tax time next year, you'll be able to pay that.
Another living allowance question that came in is the living allowance that's listed on the spreadsheet that we sent out, the one that's listed by county, is that before or after tax? Well, just keep in mind that that amount on that living allowance by county is before taxes. So the amount that you see, what you actually get in your bank account will be less because the amount that's on the spreadsheet is before taxes are deducted. And again, as we talked about that federal tax withholding / W-4, that's the form that tells the IRS, the government, how many taxes to be deducted. So that's how it's all calculated in. But the spreadsheet of living allowance by county is before taxes.
Great. There were a few questions around relocation benefits. So for those of you who are relocating, asking about when is that going to happen? When will I get paid for my relocation assistance? And that depends on when you're actually going to relocate, because we know that some of you, though you're starting now, you're starting next week, you might not relocate until sometime later, when COVID situation and, things, are appropriate for you to relocate. And so we want to make those payments at a time that's, that makes sense. So we ask that if you're relocating within the next 45 days that you let us know that. And specifically, it's the Vista Member Support Unit that you would notify, and they would then process your relocation benefit, in advance of when you relocate. So even if you're not going to relocate until later in the year, yeah, you'll still get those benefits, but you'll get them closer to the time that you actually relocate.
We'll answer a couple of questions on healthcare. Keep in mind, I will speak for Andy and say neither Andy nor I are healthcare experts, but we can answer some questions and certainly direct you to where you need to go to get your additional information. But the two questions I will answer now is, one, is the health benefit only for the Vista member or is it for family coverage also? All Vista benefits, including the healthcare benefit, is only for you as the Vista member. So just keep that in mind. Only you are covered under the healthcare benefit. And a similar question that's related to healthcare is, how do people who already have insurance get the healthcare allowance? So really quickly, just remember, as Andy said, about 2 weeks after you start service, so 2 to 3 weeks from now, you'll get an email from the International Medical Group with instructions on how to go into their system, create an account, and that's where you indicate if you currently have your own insurance, then you can select the healthcare allowance. If you don't have insurance, then you can select the health benefit plan. But you'll get more information via email. And again, you can go to AmericorVista.imglobal.com to read all the details about the benefits, including how to use them.
Great. Here's a question kind of related to the income again. How can I get proof of employment or salary for things like renting an apartment? Well, eventually you'll be able to print out your earning statements from your account in My Americorps. But for now, since you haven't started, what you would do is you would reach out to the Vista Member Support Unit. Their email is vmsu@cns.gov, and ask them to provide a letter stating that you'll be serving with Vista and what your living allowance amounts will be. So they can do that for you, turn it around pretty quickly, so that you can have that for if you're renting an apartment or any other need that you would have for that.
Absolutely. And I saw a couple of questions asking about if we could discuss or talk about remote work, which could have different meanings, but I'm assuming they're relating to what we call teleservice. So very simply, we know that, of course, there's a lot of things going on right now with the coronavirus and many other things. So if you know that you will be doing any kind of teleservice is serving from any location other than your designated project site. For example, if you're at home or somewhere. If your supervisor lets you know that you are expected to teleserve either 1 day a week, or right now it could be 5 days a week, depending on safety protocols, you need to fill out the teleservice request form, and we'll try to post a link to it in a minute. But basically, it just lets us, as in Americorps, know that you're planning to telework for X amount of time. There's a few things you check off to make sure you have everything you need, but you would want to make sure you discuss any possible teleservice with your supervisor, because they would need to know where you are and make sure that you could still serve at this time with that information. And thank you, Jeff, for posting that in the chat, the link to the teleservice request form.
Great. And here's a question that I think a lot of people are interested in. Does Americorps require us to work a certain number of hours, for example, 40 hours a week, or does our host site determine our working hours? So Vista service is full-time service, but we know that full-time is defined differently at different locations, different organizations. For a lot of places, it's 40 hours a week. Sometimes it's 37.5 hours. And because we want parity, in the workplace, we ask Vista members to serve the same number of hours that's considered full-time at the place where they're serving, right? So if it's 37.5 hours where you are serving, then you serve 37.5 hours just like the other staff there, and that is your full-time service. Each location, each site has their own record-keeping system for like time off and recording your hours, doing a timesheet or whatever. So check with your supervisor on those details. We don't have that amount of detail here to know how it's done at your site. So that's a great question to review next week when you are being oriented with your Vista team.
And I know there's a lot of questions about the Education Award. We won't answer them all. Some of the details are online, but one of the questions was, how do we use the Education Award and where can we use it? The simple answer is the Education Award obviously is an end of service benefit, so it will not be available to you until after you complete your service. It's good for 7 years. And the thing you should know, you can only use it at a Title IV institution. That's an institution that accepts federal funds. So that could be a loan lender that you're using to pay back towards student loans. It could be an educational institution, either domestically or internationally, but it has to be, the Education Award can only go to a Title IV institution that accepts US federal funds.
Great. There were a couple questions here about completing the Vista member orientation coursework on the Vista campus site. And one was, how can I tell if my Vemo is complete? A couple sections it says I scored 50% even though I got all the answers right and I did everything. So You can kind of ignore the score column. It gives a kind of an, I don't know, misleading impression. We haven't been able to quite solve that because there are some elements of the training that aren't scored at all, right? It's just like, oh, read this page, or click through these few slides. There's no quiz, there's no test, there's nothing, and so that kind of throws off the total score. The thing to do is to look for the green check marks, or the green circle with a check mark in it. As long as those are checked off, you've done it, you've satisfied it, so you don't have to worry about the score. But we do, as Eric mentioned, we do want to make sure that you're able to complete those things before you start. And ideally, by tomorrow, we want to have you complete your onboarding forms and at least have the terms and conditions and the civil rights course completed as part of the Vista member orientation.
And related to that, I saw a couple of comments about the coursework. We briefly mentioned it earlier, but there were some people mentioning how when they logged into the campus, it only showed a score of 50% or 25%, but they know they completed it. You really want to make sure you pay attention just to the green check mark next to it. The percentage is calculated on a different algorithm, so you don't have to worry if it only shows 50%. As long as there's a green check mark next to the item, we know that you've completed it. And then also make sure, of course, and once you finish, you go to my.americorps.gov and actually certify your terms and conditions, because we need to make sure once all of that's done, that your terms and conditions are certified before you start service.
Great. So another question, a couple questions have come in around holidays, right? So can you tell us which federal holidays we have off? Or what if my site has different than the federal holidays? So basically, you will follow the holiday schedule at the site where you're serving. So even though there may be a federal holiday, for example, maybe Veterans Day, it's a federal holiday, but if your site doesn't observe it, then you're expected to be serving that day, or you can use leave if you like. Kind of the one exception to that, we know there are some organizations that close down, say, for a week at the end of the year, right, between, say, Christmas and New Year's. In that case, you don't get all those extra days off. You would need to work with your supervisor to make other arrangements. If you're teleserving, you could just continue to work on those days, but you would work that out directly with your supervisor.
And one other benefit I see, it may not apply to everyone, but I saw quite a few questions about it, was around the possibility of taking classes while serving as a Vista. There were several questions. Some were asking, is it possible? Some were asking, what do we have to do to make it happen? And then there was another question about, I heard there was funding available for it. So I'll answer them backwards in saying, yes, it is possible to take classes while you're serving as a Vista member. Americorps Vista, as a large entity, as an agency, doesn't have specific funding for you to take outside classes, but it's possible that your project site might, or they may have some partnership or connection with the university. So certainly check with your supervisor. But if you do want to, or if you're planning on taking classes, whether it's part-time or several classes, you need to make sure you share your schedule with your supervisor and make sure to get their approval, because although we want you to grow professionally and learn a lot, we also know that Vista service is critical. Vista service is full-time, and you need to make sure, or I should say, we need to make sure that the schedule of your classes does not conflict with your Vista service. So it is possible to do both, but just make sure that there's no conflict and make sure you connect with your supervisor around the schedule.
All right, so it looks like we've covered a lot of the questions here. So I was just in here, and it whenever a question comes in, it jumps around a little bit, so I lost my place. Eric, are you seeing any new topics that we haven't covered already?
No, not at this time. Our fabulous team is doing a great job of answering some of the personal and one-off questions, and they'll continue to do that for the next few minutes. But I don't see any new questions, Andy.
All righty, great. Okay, well, thank you all for taking time to talk through some of your questions with us. We'll also have an open Q&A time on next Monday's webinar, and we can address more of your questions then. But for now, let's turn our attention to some online resources that you have, offer you a few reminders for this week, and then we'll wrap up with a few closing remarks. So these are the two websites that have figured prominently in this webinar today and in some of the emails that you've received from us. If you haven't already, please bookmark these sites so that you can easily access them at any time. And as a reminder, my.americorps.gov, it's what we call the My Americorps Portal. You may hear us just sometimes call it the portal. So this is a website where you applied for your Americorps position. It's where you will complete your direct deposit and your other onboarding forms, and it's where you can access your Vista assignment description. It's also where in a few weeks you'll be able to access your living allowance statements. You can request some of the benefits that we discussed today, and then you'll be able to print or save a letter that verifies your Americorps service. And the other site, of course, is the Vista campus. It's located at learn.americorps.gov, and this is the website where you complete your onboarding courses and tutorials that are part of your Vista member orientation learning path. You can also connect with other Vistas here by using the Vista Connect page.
So we have just a few minutes left on our session today. So here's one last reminder about the coursework, onboarding forms, and online criminal history check that are due from you. And these are reflected in the Vemo learning path on the Vista campus. And finally today, we would really love your feedback on our presentation. Andy and I and our whole team look at and we value the feedback so we can improve future sessions and make this as meaningful for Vista members and Vista candidates as possible. So please take the time to share your thoughts, provide your comments. We really, really value it, and thank you in advance. And with that, I want to revisit our session goals. Today, we really hope that we've started to build some new connections and put faces to names, and that we've also helped clarify some of the complexity of starting your Vista service. We know from our experience, from all the comments you've shared in the chat, this is a very busy time for you, and there's so much information that's out there. So we truly hope that today's discussion helped clarify some of the Americorps requirements and also help you know where you can find information quickly. So thank you very much for joining us on today's webinar. From Andy King, myself, Eric Powell, and all of us here at Americorps, thank you so much for joining the Vista team. We look forward to seeing you next Monday, August 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern, same time as this webinar, for our second orientation webinar, Launching Your Vista Service. Have a great rest of your week.